Welcome back to the second half of iNN's headline news and beyond. We're now going to finish up a little bit on the domestic side of the affairs, and then move over to foreign affairs. They're kind of related because it does the American political system, and this is of the Obama socialists and the Republicans on the right. Look at this from a very European, Anglo Anglo-European point of view. In other words, the point of view of the United States is a very white-centered, Euro-centered perspective. Even though you have a black sitting president, his skin may be black, but his attitudes and his thinking patterns, and this is true of anyone who's gone into a Western school. If you gone to a Western style school and studied the philosophies, and you become out on the side of these intellectual philosophies such as socialism, well, then you've adopted the Western mindset, and this was true. This actually could be kind of seen in the lead up to World War II, where you had a Japanese sort of love affair with Western behavior and thought, and you had many Japanese, including General Yamamoto, as it was shown, who had a real love affair with America, a real love affair with Western thought and ideals. And you have people who are not European identifying with the European mindset, with the European mind. So they will include, when they talk about racism, they will talk about other non-European people as if they themselves are European and not non-European. But European is geographically specific. And there's no mistake that the Caucasians in the Caucasus, which is a real place up near Russia, there's a mountain range known as the Caucasus, in an area, and anything west of the Caucasus is white. That's Caucasian. These are Caucasians. If you are east and south of the Caucasus, you are not European. And this is what a lot of people need to understand, is that the divide in the world is centered around not just black and white, but around this particular dividing line. White is anything that is west of the Caucasus. That's the whole. Anything in the European sphere, including the United States, that came out of the European sphere. It was British, was heavily influenced by white thinking, by European and white Western thought and Western thinking. Anyone who is east of there and then south has a different mindset. There's a different form of thought. Although Western thought, through its colonialism, has sort of imposed its views and ideals on the world for a long period of time now, that there is a meshing of the two thoughts, so that it's in many cases hard to differentiate or hard to separate the two. But this sort of seems to be lost on CNN. It's not presented in CNN, and it's not presented on the O'Reilly factor when you're talking about when he's talking about freedom. He's talking more specifically about white Americans. His understanding of these issues, and I can sort of see where these white psychologists who were talking about race issues really didn't seem to understand the dynamics of race. And this is particularly about this whole race baiting study that Anderson Cooper has done. And if you are isolated to the United States, and if you are an American, and not used to cities like Toronto, then your view of the world is really white. It's a Western Eurocentric view. It's only when you step outside, and you can do this in Toronto because there are so many different cultures here, and the immigration is such that there is no assimilation required. And so people, when they come, don't assimilate. And so you can walk into neighborhoods as if you were walking into their neighborhoods back from wherever they came from. This includes the foods. This includes the speaking. There is a distinction here in Toronto between your standard, what we call, there's a Chinese restaurant for the average white consumer, even though it's all run by Chinese, and then there are Asian restaurants that can cater to all Asian people. In other words, you walk in these restaurants and you will not see one white person in there. And on white, I mean European again. You need to understand here that white means European. It's not black and white. It's not color differentiation. It's a culture differentiation. And when you walk into an Asian restaurant, everybody in the restaurant, in terms of the customers, are all Asian, and the menu is primarily in the variety of different Asian dialects that you have. And they're there specifically to cater to the Asian immigrants. The Greeks had their restaurants like that. The Greeks had, because their population wasn't as large as the Asian is. The Asians really created a new dynamic now, because coming into Toronto, they have such a large population that they can turn whole segments of the city into primarily, it's like you're walking into an Asian city. Now, many white Canadian people are offended by this and move out of the neighborhood. But my choice has been, I live in that type of neighborhood. I live in a predominantly immigrant Asian neighborhood. The culture that I grew up here in Toronto was a predominantly non-European Greek culture. The culture was basically Asian Minor, Middle Eastern. That's the culture where the culture came. It wasn't a European. There's two types of Greeks. There is a European Greek, a Euro Greek, who is primarily European and Western, and then there is a South Eastern and a Southern Greek. And this Greek is more Asian Minor, India. This is where the culture is common to. You can find the culture all the way from India into North Africa. The foods are similar. If you go to Morocco, to Egypt, if you go into even into Somalia, Ethiopia, all those cultures there. If you go all the way up into Lebanon, to Syria, to Iraq, even a little bit into Iran, to Turkey, all those areas there, the culture all the way to India has a commonality to it. And this is the culture that I grew up in. And my background, my ethnic background, is, with my last name being Kara, it is of, when I trace the origins of my people back, we are Greeks from Cappadocia. We are the Asian Minor Greeks. We are not European Greeks the way other Greeks are more European. We are more the Asiatic and African Greeks. So, as I said, the boundaries of white and non-white, European and non-European, is not about race. It's not about the color of your skin. It's about culture primarily. There's a divide in culture. And when the psychologists describe how a 6-year-old perceives the difference in these things, and they try to say, well, our questions that we asked and the depiction we showed them were innocuous. They were benign. But the thing is that it doesn't matter how innocuous or benign your questions are. When you're doing surveys, their surveys are notoriously incorrect. All you have to do is look at the exit polling to understand this, and during elections, to understand how, and even look at polling itself. Polling itself is so subjective that you really can't draw any firm conclusions from it. But what you did see in there, and this was completely missed uh, by the psychologist, was that there were fears on both black and white side that reflected the divisions that occurred in American society between various different cultures. And the divide in the United States is much sharper than it is here in Toronto. And I can't speak for the rest of Canada because Toronto is a different situation than the rest of Canada. It's not as it's not multicultural. It's heterocultural. Because all cultures don't necessarily mix. They're free to do whatever they want to do, and it's really international. Toronto is in a ethnic sense a very international city. And you're free to be whatever culture or ethnicity you are. And there's no need to assimilate. Your assimilation in terms of what you pick up in Western culture is basically your own choice. But in the United States, there is more of a pressure to assimilate. There is more of a pressure to be American. And this standard is pushed. So when you see how things split up and how groups split up, they focused on the splitting up between whites and blacks, but if you think as the kids get older, into 12, 13, 14 years old, there isn't only a split in black and white, there's a split between, and this is where the different groups are. There's the goth, there's the emo, there's the preppies, there's the beauty queens, there's the jocks. There are so many cliques and differences in society that are being overlooked by these adults who are again, these are academics who really have no sense of reality. And this is why they view the things the way they view. Because if they did have a sense of reality, they'd see that the divide was not simply black and white, but along a variety of different social boundaries, that there are barriers. And I can tell you, and they were saying, well, why can't a black person date a white person? And what they don't understand is there are strong cultural differences. And I'll tell you that from my experience, and I'll tell you this is from what I've seen even in the Asian community, that in most of the non-European cultures, the non-Western cultures, there is an expected behavior of men, a macho behavior that men are supposed to ascribe to, which includes a significant amount of womanizing. In other words, for a ethnically oriented man, there are two types of women. There are the toys that are disposable and thrown away, and then there is the woman that you marry. The toys that you dispose and throw away are the ones you have earlier on, but in your teens and so on and so forth. And the one that you marry is someone who comes along later on and is the person you're going to be with for the rest of your life. This is the expectation within the cultures, and this is the mindset that the parents who say to these kids, "Stay away from so and so," have. And the primary one of the reasons is that you don't want your daughters, and this is particularly true of many cultures like this, not just simply the Muslims, but Muslims take it to the extreme. You don't want your daughters to be the disposable toy. You want your daughter to be the marrying kind. And as sexist as this sounds, this is the reality. Even when you go into the open sexual environment of pornography, and you look at the men who are looking at the girls who are in the strip clubs, they're not there because they're liking the quality of the girls dancing. It has nothing to do with that. I mean, this whole concept of the woman is empowered by stripping and is demonstrating her power. No, she's not. The males are not thinking anything like this. This is what I'm talking about. How divorced from reality a lot of academics are. They're completely out to lunch. And all they have to do is sit in a bar and watch these people, like you watch apes and gorillas in the zoo, to understand this. But they haven't done this. They're just doing an academic study, and this is the way they think. And so what happens is this cultural difference, these cultural divides in how one person treats another and how another person treats another, is in many ways how we see and how we treat other people. And this comes into how foreign affairs is seen or from the American eye. And from the American eye and from American policy, American foreign policy, everything is viewed through a European, a Eurocentric view. Even though you have Obama standing up and saying that he is the first black president, this doesn't mean anything, because the divide globally, if anyone who knows what I'm talking about, who has this ethnic background, who is not white, who's not European, knows that the ethnic divide is not black and white, it's cultural. And culturally speaking, Obama is white. He's European. And his perspective is that of the European socialists in Europe. And this is why, to him, and to a lot of other socialist Democrats, India and China represent a threat. Because India and China have gone off the socialist path. They're not European, they're not white, and yet they're very successful. And now they are threatening to have a dominance, a force, a say in global politics, in geopolitics, that didn't exist before. So in other words, what's happening is we're seeing a shift in cultural dynamics in terms of how the geopolitical power spectrum plays out, from being a singularly white European dominance into now we start seeing the Asian and the non-European influence on the rise. And this terrifies the white Europeans, including Obama. And so what we see is, you see Obama, you look at their actions, they're actively moving against this change from a Eurocentric view to a non-Eurocentric view. And this is why you see very bizarre behaviors in foreign policy. And we can take a look and see now that in Somalia, they've been trying to get rid of the Islamists in there, but the Western European, again, who are the white Europeans who are meddling inside of Somalia, don't understand the circumstances. And just yesterday yesterday, there was an explosion at one of the Somalian soccer stadiums where the Prime Minister was speaking, and it killed killed about 8 people. And the Al Qaeda in Somalia, the group who say they're affiliated with Al Qaeda, has stepped up and claimed responsibility. And we see the same type of Islamic extremism popping up in Nigeria. We see it within Libya. We see it all over Africa. A lot of the African clashes that are going on because you have a Islamist, a Muslim, pushed into the country. But the American sense, the white sense of trying to keep control over things, because they don't understand the cultural differences, they see everything from a white perspective, from a white point of view. They're there to act as overlords, as the colonial masters. And a large chunk of it has to do with a lot of these countries like Somalia have access to a lot of raw resources and materials that the United States and the European governments need. And so what happens is that you're having the American and European interests step in and take over and become the primary interests. When you have the United States, you have the United Kingdom, you have France, and all the other colonial powers in Africa, they're acting on their own economic and material resources interests. They're not acting in the interests of the people, and they're behaving in a very colonial fashion. And this is not hasn't been lost on the Somali people. And this is what's causing some of the divide. Some of what's providing the sympathy, the sympathetic view to the Islamists, and it sort of is fueling now what Al Qaeda is doing in Africa. Is they've been able to convince a lot of people that the Europeans have been trading Africans like slaves, and we can see this actually when we go and look at the what's going on in Syria, where Russia has come out and clarified its position, stating that there will not be a regime change. It was sort of standing against, the U.S. and U.K. have been pushing for regime change, along to a lesser degree with France and Israel. They're pushing for regime change. They're pushing for an all-out war in Syria. And Russia came up on the other side and say, no, this is not what we're going to have. We're going to allow the things to resolve themselves out without regime change. And along comes, in this situation here, as we're reading, if you read through the news, and these are the back pages of the various different newspapers and the various different news sources, what you'll see is that this whole concept of hate crimes and hate speech, and this is the Eurocentric view, the American view of race, that there are certain visible minorities, there are certain minorities who are worth more than other minorities. If you are not part of the visible minorities, then you are not worth the effort that they are going to expend and spend on the visible minorities. Black people are a visible minority, so there is a high interest in the media, in a lot of the charitable organizations, in the way European and white philanthropy works out. A lot of it is going towards Africa. Asians and Palestinians are invisible. They're the invisible minority. And so just today we see that the International Criminal Court has turned its back on the atrocities committed on the Palestinians inside of Israel. And the thing is, they're not recognizing, even though if you look at the circumstances, that Israel has fundamentally created two prison camps, Gaza and the West Bank. This is completely being ignored. While at the same time you have the Israeli supporters, the AIPAC supporters, the AIPAC friends like Senator John McCain, Joe Lieberman, and Senator Lindsey Graham stepping up and saying that they need to fund and support the Syrian rebels, who are fundamentally jihadists, and we see them all across the world, and the way they treat other people, including their own Muslim brothers, and saying that we need to arm them in order to protect the Syrian people. But if you look and see what the result has been, because this is not a new policy, it's an old policy. It's the policy that began in Pakistan, as I said before, that was aimed at bringing Israeli-style democracy to the Muslim world. This was first trotted out in Pakistan and created the mess that you see in Pakistan today. It's been the change in policy from the Cold War policy in Afghanistan. This became the second U.S. policy in Afghanistan to bring in a Israeli-style democracy inside of Afghanistan. This is what was also done in Iraq. It was done in Libya just recently, and we're still having major problems in Libya. There are, on a daily basis, clashes between a variety of different tribal groups. The clashes and the warrings between these different groups are using the weapons that were given to these people by the UN, by NATO, by the United States, by the United Kingdom, by France. All this weaponry was given to them. All the ammunition was given to them. The funds were given to them, and now is it's fueling wars all the way into Mali in Africa. And of course, these white saviors are standing back and saying, oh, no, 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 we're not responsible for this. And of course, there's no hint that these white overlords, these white masters, including Obama, are ever going to be held accountable for what was done in Libya. I mean, if Gaddafi committed war crimes in the manner that he did, where we saw mass graves, we saw tortures and executions and so on and so forth, then in the aftermath, if this does not stop, if the condition does not improve for people, but you're still having clashes, you're still having killings, you're still having executions, you're still having mass graves being found, these pro-Gaddafi mass graves being found, then the people who initiated this, who supplied the weapons, need to be held accountable in the same fashion that Gaddafi was. But when we look and see what the ICC does, because, again, these people are now back on the invisible minority list, there's no concern, and because the Europeans are the masters of the UN, they are the masters of the EU, they are now with Obama as master of the United States, they will not be held accountable because they are white masters. So this is how we see things. This is the result. This is how the results of U.S. foreign policy. This is the result on the world of the U.S. European white view of the world, and these things can be changed. There are positives with the United States. Again, if we move toward, and I'll talk more about this, about moving towards more of an individualist society, that a lot of the concepts of American individualism is actually buried in history. It's buried in a pre-European history, and that it can be resurrected by Eastern thought, by Eastern people, and brought forward as a new democratic model for the earth. Instead of having the UN, you can have, and this is what I've set up, and this is why DE is the way it is a non-European concept of individualism, where we have individual sovereignty. And it supports and is the basis for a lot of what we see in the American Constitution that was never brought into fulfillment. So I'll leave you with this today. I hope you will go into the bar down below. There is a link for Daniel Yergin's The Prize. The 4th episode of 8 is up. I strongly recommend that you look at this episode of this documentary. Go through the whole documentary, 1 to 4, if you haven't done so. There is a lot of information. There is a lot of historical background that is pertinent, that is important for the context, to understand the context in which today's events are occurring. So I'll leave you with that, and I will say good night, and I'll see you tomorrow night for iNN's Headlines and Beyond. Take it easy.